Do you remember watching the Waltons growing up, or Leave It to Beaver? These happy families where everybody got along. There wasn't really any fighting. There was just love and connection and caring about each other. I always saw, growing up in Germany, I watched these movies that I don't know if they played in the US. There was a show called Lassie, which was about a loving couple and their son and a dog that always had adventures. A show called Flipper, same kind of idea, but there was a dolphin instead of a dog. And Skippy, the same idea, except there was a kangaroo. And these were all like really feel-good movies, but are they realistic? Were people really happier back then? I kind of think of these movies as fiction in the same way that porn is fiction. That's not how real women enjoy to be intimate. And James Bond is also fiction. James Bond is the fictional male hero, almost like Superman, who can fly in his cape and save every damsel, but James Bond is always well dressed, always charming. He always knows what to say. He gets the woman, and his erections never fail him. I am sure of it. Then we also have the Fast and Furious car chases, where people do driving 60 miles an hour, do almost 90-degree turns, and no one ever gets injured. And then the romantic comedies. I mean, there's so much fiction in the movies, and sometimes we may think that's real. I don't think that real men are not James Bond. Real people don't drive like Fast and Furious. Real men and women don't have intimacy like in porn. And real families are not like the Waltons. Now, I could be wrong, but I'm just questioning it. I think to the extent that people were happy in their families and in multi-generational households years ago depends on their expectations, their opportunities, and their emotional attachment style. So the reason I started thinking about this is because social media has given us a great look inside people's lives. Because first of all, you have these YouTube influencers who put their life on full display. And then you also have kind of like, whether it's journalists or citizen journalists making videos and talking about different celebrities and exposing kind of the con. It's really harder to pull the wool over people's eyes in the days of social media. So the same people that could have gotten away with their perfect life story 20 years ago, they're now being exposed. And while I don't have the whole list of people who are being exposed, you can just look down YouTube videos or the gossip section of any newspaper to see all the people who have fallen from grace because their scandals were exposed. Mostly due to the internet, I believe. The whole Me Too movement was about exposing men who were sexually harassing women in the workplace and are aping them. We also have the recent YouTube influencer, what is her name? Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrand, the Mormons. The mom was an influencer. There was a show, 8 Passengers, I believe. She has 6 kids. She and her husband have 6 kids. And she abused them all horribly. It all came out to light a few days ago, I believe, when her 12-year-old son escaped her home and went to a neighbor's house and asked for the police to be called. He was emaciated and thirsty and had duct tape around his ankles. Now they're both in jail right now awaiting trial, and they're both Mormon. The Ruby Franke is the mom, and Jodi Hildebrand is the Mormon therapist. She was abusive. They were all abusive women. They portrayed themselves and were followed by thousands or millions of women, I don't know how many, seeking their advice, while in secret they hated everyone and they were abusive. And Ruby Franke, who's the mom, a couple of her relatives have come out and done interviews and talked about the cycle of intergenerational abuse. So first of all, they were exposed due to the internet, and we also are learning more about the intergenerational abuse. So apparently all of the people in this family were abused. And just from me talking to other people and watching other videos, I do understand that people who are abusive or controlling, they grew up that way. People don't just grow up in a loving family and suddenly become abusers. So people who are violent or abusive, they grew up that way. And I wonder, since we're hearing more and more about these people who are abusive to their children, or these women who poison their husbands and all of this, how many relationships are actually healthy and how many families are actually healthy? Because we have these people portraying this. Who is another case that I can think of now? Kori Richens, Kori, I believe. She's the Mormon mom of 3 who ended her husband's life with a fentanyl overdose. She's currently, was she just convicted? I think the trial is still going on. Yeah. I don't have all the exact details on these cases, but I kind of loosely follow them. But on her Instagram, she portrayed herself as this perfect family, this loving Mormon mother. But meanwhile, she was trying to end her husband. She hated him. So what I'm trying to say is that we have this idea often of these people's perfect lives, and they're able to get away with it. They post all these loving Facebook posts and happy family Instagram posts, but it's all a charade and it's all a mask. And the mask is coming off because of social media and the internet, and people are able to communicate more and expose these frauds. And of course, then we also have other influencer frauds like the financial scammers and so on. But talking about family dynamics, these people that have this mask of, we want to pretend to the outside world that we have no problems, that we get along, that everything is fine, they're being exposed. So my question is, what percentage of the population is living a fraud to the external world of this happy family, whereas the real family is really unhappy and struggling? We think about Chris Watts. I think about Chris Watts and all these other people that have been in the news. How common is that? Or are these just one-off situations? I know from myself talking to people that many people have had very difficult childhoods, that they have risen above these difficult childhoods and they're living happier lives. But a lot of these people are not in relationships. They're single people that, because of their difficult childhoods, were never able to get into a relationship. And then we also know about people in relationship who are abusive to each other. I mean, look at Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. And there are many more cases like that, where the woman is the emotional abuser or the man is the physical abuser. About domestic violence, you know, the recent case of the Los Angeles sex therapist who was thrown off the balcony by her jealous ex-boyfriend that currently is in trial in Los Angeles right now. I mean, I could go on, but why did she ever... was she ever attracted to a man like that, and what made him so unstable? So the question is, and also from me coaching people and talking to people, a lot of people had really fucked up childhoods. So the first piece is, now that we're starting to see more of the reality of people's inner worlds and relationships, it kind of begs the question, what percentage of relationships are actually healthy and functional, and what percentage of them are actually just pretending and are not happy at all? And in my guesstimation, that number would not have changed significantly, because we know that generational abuse and love continues, that families pass on their function or dysfunction, that the world is kind of waking up to the emotional realm. We have more access to self-development work, and we have more access to therapy, and we understand more about childhood development and trauma, And I think we're more interested in, or more able to be interested in our personal lives than we were before. A long time ago, people's relationships were formed based on survival. You needed to have a partner. And if you couldn't get one, there were always people who couldn't get one, but the women who couldn't get one, they would either have a business or they would work as a live-in servant or housekeeper somewhere. Men needed a woman and women needed a man. As we've become more financially independent, our need for each other has decreased. As we became more financially independent, we started moving away from each other to get jobs in other cities, or saying like, well, I don't really need you. Do I want to be with you? So I think that when we actually look at, like, the divorce rate in India is lower because women don't have the same opportunity to escape the abusive relationship or the domestic violence in that relationship. But here in the Western world, where women have more options, women are able to leave these unhappy relationships, and that's why the divorce rate is increasing. But also our expectations have changed. We now demand relationships to be fulfilling and to be nurturing. Whereas, my grandparents didn't even think about that. My grandparents, on my dad's side in Iran, my grandmother had, and both my grandparents were well-to-do, by the way. My grandfather in Iran, he and his wife had 7 children, and he always brought his concubines or young ladies home, or apparently he had a bed in the back of his store. And that was the store actually where the Shah actually shopped, at my grandfather's store. He was very successful actually in his store, but he had a little bed in the back of the store for women, his girlfriends, and he paid for some of them to go to college in Europe. Like, he had a lot of money, but he treated his wife like crap. She would have to serve tea in bed to him and his girlfriends. And all of my dad and his siblings, they're all fucked up, emotionally fucked up. None of them have healthy relationships with their spouses or their children. They were all fucked up. Then on my mom's side, my grandparents, they were well-to-do, so they had like nursemaids and housekeepers and people to help with the kids. But life was hard. They lived during the war, World War II, and my grandfather was kind of a belligerent, aggressive asshole guy. Now, by the time he was my grandfather, he was super sweet, I just have such fond memories of him. But I remember my grandmother saying, when this old man dies, we're going to make our life better. So I don't think they were that happy. And then reading about how hard life was, like during the Dust Bowl and during the war and during the famine, I do not necessarily think that life was any better, but my grandmothers could not leave. That's the point I'm trying to make. Nowadays, these grandmothers would have left. They would have been like, I don't like this situation. You're way too controlling and aggressive. You're way too much of a cheater. You don't even acknowledge me. So I am the fuck out of here. So see, that's why women are getting divorced, because they're no longer willing to tolerate all of this bad treatment. And that has left men in a lurch, because now they can no longer abuse women. They actually have to show up in a relationship in some kind of emotional way. And people didn't used to expect that. People would stay in their marriage because a woman was prized, not just for her sexual chastity, but also for how many years she endured or was in her marriage. Personal fulfillment was not anywhere near the list. It was survival, and it was social standing, and it was an embarrassment if you got divorced. So people would put up with all kinds of stuff. They didn't expect emotional fulfillment. They just expected to be able to deal with life one more day with this person that they got married to. So, let's see what I say. It was people's family lives were based on opportunity, expectation, and then the attachment style. So, okay, So I think that also, okay, I know one lady who told me that she grew up in a household with her parents and her grandma, so it was 3 generations under one roof, and that sounds really sweet. But the grandma was a bitch. She said it was horrible. She herself would never ever want to live with her children because her grandmother was such a bitch and such a burden. So then it kind of begs the question of how happy were these families, these intergenerational families? And again, it depends on the expectations they had. You know, if you grew up during the Depression, and I've talked to people who grew up during the Depression, life was hard. There was no DoorDash, you know, there was no air conditioning. People worked hard for their survival, and they didn't have time to attend to their kids' emotional needs. It was just survival. Everybody had to pitch in and work, and people had a lot of kids so that everybody could help on the farm or whatever it was. So in a lot of ways, life is easier today, but we're also more spoiled, we're more entitled, and here's the problem for a relationship now, is that people used to make a lot of living in their community. Like if you were a coal miner or working in manufacturing or something, you lived in your town and you could stay in your town. But as we've done outsourcing, a lot of these towns have fallen into decay. These men have not found any other jobs, so they've even either succumbed to the opioid crisis or alcoholism because they feel useless, they have no opportunity, or they've moved away. And people are moving all over the country to go to school, to pursue their jobs, their individualism, and they're not really prioritizing the family life as much as they used to. Is this good or bad? I really don't know. I'm just putting the ideas out there. I think that for people who have a healthy attachment style, they can really enjoy being close to their family and connected to their family and seeing their cousins and their aunts and their parents on a regular basis because they live in the same town and they have get-togethers, or they live in the same house, or mom has the studio house out back. Are they really happy? I don't know. And maybe people are happy when they're not that close together. I think there's this fantasy life of the good old days of Little House on the Prairie. But Little House on the Prairie is a myth. Was it ever that great? I can tell you that I do not want to live anywhere near my parents because they're not that great to be around. My dad is a Persian guy who's kind of controlling and set in his ways. And my mom is kind of on her spiritual meditation Vuhu journey, you know. I just don't have that much in common with her. But there was a time when I did because we needed each other, you know. Again, it's based on need, it's based on expectation, it's based on opportunity. You know, a big reason I married my husband is, yes, I did love him, and he provided for me. He gave me some financial security. Nowadays, a lot of women don't need that from men. So if we don't need that from a man, or we don't need that from our parents, why do we want to be with them? A lot of times, a parent can live with their adult child because they can play the role of babysitting the grandkids. So then there's some value added and some appreciation built in. Other times, the parent is old and sick, and the adult kids get emotional fulfillment out of knowing that they can be there to take care of their parents. There's a joy in the giving and the joy in taking care of and fulfilling their responsibility. For an aging parent, an ill parent. So again, I think it depends on the situation, but I do not think that a lot of families were happier then. And now we see a lot of people saying, my family was toxic, my family was abusive, so they go gray rock or no contact with their abusive family. So I guess I'm just really curious what percentage of families are really healthy now, and what percentage of families were really healthy then, and what percentage of families would have really thrived having 3 generations under one roof if they had the option to not do it.